So here I am in Sásabe, Sonora, just not very far from the border. And yes, people say the town is controlled by a drug cartel, but the report I heard in advance is that it's safe to be there, and that was my experience at least. Can't tell you what you should do, but I enjoyed my visit. So I'm just walking through town here and getting a look at what places look like. And there's paved roads and dirt roads both. And there's no Google Street View in town. Well, a little bit on the US side, but nothing down here. And the impression I get is that there's no Google Street View here because no one has prioritized doing it. And before we see more video, let's take a quick look at some geography. Here's where Sásabe is, somewhat near the end of this plume of green that comes up from southern Mexico. And showing border lines here, we can see the Sonora side is much larger than the Arizona side. And looking across all of the ports of entry between Arizona and Sonora, we find this pattern continues. Here's San Luis, Mexico and US, Sonoita and Lukeville, Nogales and Nogales, Naco and Naco, and Agua Prieta and Douglas. I have some guesses why the Mexico side is always larger in these cases, but I haven't studied it well, so I won't comment on that today. And here's a look at the wall and the border crossing from the Mexico side. When driving across the border, the US guards had me step out and open up my car and the trunk, and I waited out there and they checked IDs and car registration. On the Mexico side, I just drove through this lane that said nothing to declare. I said nothing to declare. He also asked me to pop up the trunk, but it was much simpler than on the US side. And this photo is from this video from Alejandro Corrales Felix. And here's a picture from the US side with the small town of Sásabe, Arizona, with the story here we'll see in a second, and the border station, wall, and Mexico side. Off to the east, you can also see this lovely dynamite damage from border wall work a couple years ago. These last two pictures come from the Nomadic Border YouTube channel. Meanwhile, in Google Street View, we can see the post office and Sásabe store on the US side. This is where I converted my dollars to pesos, and the lady who runs this store said she's 4th generation Sásabe, 3rd generation running the store, and seemed like she gets annoyed by people asking that question too often, but she was nice anyway. Meanwhile, enough talk and more shoes on the ground. Back down the main street in Sásabe, Sonora. And just to be clear, this is a very small town, maybe about 1,000 people, and Sásabe, Arizona on the US side is tiny, less than 100 people. And I tried walking up to a restaurant across the street from the plaza here, but some ladies on the street told me that place was closed, and they pointed me to some modern fast food looking kind of place, but I asked, where can I get some carne asada? And they pointed me down the street to this other restaurant, and that's where I ate some food. And the food was tasty, and the decorations were nice too. And while in Sásabe, I also met a nice guy from Honduras. I didn't ask how long it took him, but he said he'd walked all the way across Guatemala and Mexico. He said he passed through Huehuetenango in Guatemala, which is a town that I visited a long time ago. And I didn't catch every detail, but he seemed to have come across the northern part here, through Puebla, Mexico City, and then along the west coast, up to Sásabe. And he said he traveled alone with no specific travel plan in advance. Sometimes I imagine walking across Mexico myself, and so I was curious where he'd gone. And he didn't want to be on the video, and I can't blame him, so all I get is my report of the conversation. Anyway, when I was done in town, I walked back over to the Super Coyote store where I'd parked, and I don't know where things might have been in the past, but Super Coyote is not correct on Google Maps today. It's actually up here where it says basketball court, right after 5th Street when heading north, and there's the parking for it. And inside, I found a lot of the same kinds of things I might expect to find in a Latin market in Tucson, where I live. Though one thing I found interesting were these health warnings on the outside of the packages. Seems to be Mexican law. Meanwhile, I'll leave you with this footage that I took of Baboquivari Peak on the way down to Sásabe. It's the most sacred place to the Tohono O'odham people. And maybe I'll learn better how to interview people in the towns I visit in the future. Meanwhile, bye for now.